Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the next hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from right across the continent. But let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. So earnings season is pretty much checking in at the moment. Anglo-American off the back of a very strong half year. They're actually announcing a share buyback, the first one since 2006, $1.8 billion. It's going to be running all the way to the end of March next year. And remember, they're listed in both London and Johannesburg. The shares are up by at least 56% in Johannesburg, up 24% over in London. Also for your calendars tomorrow, East African breweries are releasing their full year results over here at the NSC. That should be very interesting to give you a sense of the consumer market for alcoholic beverages across East Africa. Here's what's coming up tonight. The IMF completes the final review in Egypt's $12 billion loan program. The ratings agency Moody's is cautioning over the $4.2 billion bailout of Eskom. And trade talks between China and the US are set to resume in Shanghai. Our starting point tonight is Egypt, where the International Monetary Fund says its board has completed the fifth and final review of Egypt's $12 billion loan program, effectively allowing authorities in Cairo to draw down the final $2 billion tranche. The disbursement will complete the amount approved under the three-year extended credit facility program, which was formally started in November 2016. Now, the fund also says that Egypt has successfully completed the arrangement under this facility, and it's actually achieved, in the fund's view, its main objectives. They add that the macroeconomic situation in the country has also improved a lot in the 3 years, supported by the authorities' strong ownership and implementation of the reform program and decisive policy actions as well. So how exactly has this policy played out in the last 3 years? Let's find out. Yasser Kim is live in Cairo tonight with more data on this. So Yasser, now that Egypt has gotten the final tranche, or rather will get the final tranche of this $12 billion loan, what will it do next in its relationship with the IMF?
Ramah, there is talk that there might be, and still not confirmed. The government says it is studying the possibility of continuing cooperation with the IMF, but it's going to be non-financial. I mean, there will be no loan, but only the IMF would work as a supervisor or to give advice and on how to go forward with the economic reforms, but without any loans. The government hopes that this would have two good benefits. First of all, that it would help the government as it continues its economic reforms with the support of the IMF. And as long as the IMF is giving support to the economic reforms, then this will create a positive atmosphere and climate for foreign investments and donor countries and other countries to enter the Egyptian market and to work with the Egyptian market, because the IMF would give some kind of confidence to the Egyptian market and to anyone who wants to deal with Egypt. So that's why the government is probably planning to sit down with the IMF and talk about more work together in the next phase of the economic reforms.
Right. So over the 3 years of this program, we've seen some interesting trends in key metrics. The country's debt-GDP ratio, for instance, that's gone down from at least 100% back in the 2016-2017 fiscal year to 85% at the moment. What's the government's plan, though, to keep that ratio from rising again, at least over the medium term?
Yes, there is a strategy the government has announced that it already started and will continue to add to it. And for example, the more of issuing long-term bonds that would help the government receive money now but pay on a long term, so that it can not feel the burden of the debt. At the same time, it will be called the program loans, which means that any loan would be linked to a project, to a program that would bring some kind of revenue or income. So it's not money that will be spent and lost, but money that should come so it can create revenue, and so it would help in repay the debt, and at the same time to create extra revenue for the government and and lower the debt. Then you've got more, which is a very important part, which is more tax collection system, to restructure the tax collection system to help increase the revenue coming from tax collection. Then you have the public IPOs that are expected in the fourth quarter of 2019. The government hopes this would revitalize the investment opportunities, create investment opportunities, attract money from abroad through the foreign exchange, through the EGX, and therefore this would also help in reducing any loans by getting other forms of revenue. And you have also tapping the Asian market, Japan, China, Singapore as well, and the Gulf states in the next few months to try to attract investments from there.
Right, one last question for you. We've also seen unemployment levels over that same 3-year window coming down. 12% in fiscal 16-17, 8% at the end of last year. But over that period of time, what has the labour force participation rate for women looked like? Are more women coming into the workforce?
Yes, the difference is huge. It's still predominantly high for males against females. However, if you look at the past 3 years, there has been an improvement for women. If you look at the unemployment rate, for example, for women, we're talking in 2016, it was around 23.6%. In 2017, 23.1%. And in 2018, it went down to 21%. So there is an improvement there. However, the women only constitute around 20% of the total workforce at the moment. It's lower than international rates or developed countries, but it is higher than the last few years as well. It jumped from 18 to 20% in the last 2 years. So there is an improvement. However, the government says it's working hard on trying to find the convenient climate for more women to work, especially not just in the workforce, but having their own SMEs, having their own small businesses in rural areas and in areas outside of the main cities. That's where there's a lot of improvement there, and the higher number of women leading small businesses in these rural areas. And that could make a big difference for women in Egypt in the next few years.
Indeed. We'll see how this plays out. Thank you for the update. That's Yasser Hakim there live in Cairo. Now then, on to Zimbabwe. The country's tourism minister, Priska Mufumira, has been detained for questioning by a newly formed Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission. Mufumira is the first senior government official who's been detained by the commission, which is appointed by the president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, in mid-July. The president promised to take stern action against acts of corruption. Transparency International says corruption costs Zimbabwe's economy at least $1 billion a year. Mufumira is a senior member of the ruling ZANU-PF party. Previously, she was a Labour minister who oversaw the $1 billion state pension fund. The Anti-Corruption Commission has said that an audit report into the fund's operations implicated several high-profile officials for abuse of funds. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has promised to make the United Kingdom, in his words, the greatest place on earth by leaving the EU on the 31st of October. Now, the UK's new leader has promised to do a new Brexit deal with the bloc in less than 99 days. He's also warned that if EU leaders refused something he said was a remote possibility, then the UK will leave without a deal. Quote, no ifs or buts, end of quote. Johnson's bet is that the threat of a no-deal Brexit will persuade the EU's biggest powers, that's Germany and France, to agree to revise the withdrawal agreement. That deal, of course, was arrived at by his predecessor, Theresa May, last November, but the House has rejected it 3 times.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I shall make a statement on the mission of this new Conservative government. But before I begin, I'm sure the whole House will join me in paying tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, for all she has given to the service of our nation. From fighting modern slavery to tackling the problems of mental ill health, she has a great legacy on which we shall all be proud to build. And our mission is to deliver Brexit on the 31st of October for the purpose of uniting and re-energising our great United Kingdom and making this country the greatest place on earth. And when I say the greatest place on earth, I'm conscious that some may accuse me of hyperbole. But it is useful to imagine the trajectory on which we could now be embarked. By 2050, it is more than possible that the United Kingdom will be the greatest and most prosperous economy in Europe, at the centre of a new network of trade deals, which we have pioneered.
All right then, quite a few promises coming through there from Boris Johnson. Let's see how this all plays out. Jamie Owen is in London tonight, has been following the developments in Boris Johnson's first full day in office. So Jamie, the Prime Minister said a little earlier today that the Irish backstop must be struck out if there's a deal to be had with the EU. What was the reaction from Ireland and Northern Ireland?
Well, let me give you both responses because we've had them now. The Irish Prime Minister has said he will listen to the alternatives to the Northern Ireland backstop. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, said she sees some scope for the Irish backstop to be overwritten in certain circumstances. Now, these are no more, really, than warm words if you look at them. But warm words will be a first step for Boris Johnson and his hopes to fixing Brexit's biggest barrier, this shared land border between the UK and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and how you ensure frictionless trade between the UK and the EU. The EU and Ireland, of course, understandably, it's the right diplomatic thing to do, want to show their willingness to listen to a new leader, a new Prime Minister, their willingness to listen to Boris Johnson. But listening is one thing, changing their position really is quite another.
Indeed. Also in Parliament today, I understand the Prime Minister said that preparations for a no-deal exit have to be accelerated. But in concrete terms, what does that involve?
Well, quite simply, Boris is preparing the country for no-deal Brexit. He would, of course, prefer a deal, but he says if he doesn't get a deal, Britain, under his prime ministership, will leave the EU with no deal. Brexiteers here, you see, believe that Prime Minister Theresa May, Boris Johnson's predecessor, did not prepare the UK government for no deal. Brexiteers claim that the civil service and many ministers were Remain supporters and therefore never accepted or prepared for the possibility of a no-deal Brexit. Boris Johnson has now sacked half of the UK cabinet, and he's replaced those Remain supporters with Leave supporters, his own loyalists. Boris has said Brexit or die. Theresa May promised Brexit means Brexit, but failed to deliver it. Boris says we will leave, deal or no deal. So quite simply today, he has said to his ministers, prepare and prepare for no deal.
Indeed. One last question for you. So sterling's down about 0.76%, about 0.8% really, against American dollar so far in July. It is an imprecise reflection of market sentiment, but using that as our springboard, what does a market make of Sajid Javid as Chancellor of the Exchequer?
I think it depends who you talk to, but I mean the blunt, broad answer is the markets have had plenty of time to prepare for Boris and for Brexit. So in a sense, insofar as you can ever prepare for uncertainty, the markets are prepared for uncertainty. Let me tell you a bit about Sajid Javid then. He's an experienced government minister who has a track record of running major government departments. Before he was a politician, this new Chancellor was a very senior banker. He worked for institutions like Deutsche Bank. He worked at the beginning of his career for Chase Manhattan Bank in New York for a number of years. In a profile recently, one newspaper wrote about the new Chancellor, Sajid Javid, that when he left banking and took up a career in politics, he took a 90% pay cut. So perhaps that gives you some sort of insight into his convictions for his new career. He's very much a Boris Johnson loyalist and an arch Brexiteer. He knows his stuff. Whether you agree with his politics or not, he's viewed with respect because of his financial background and his ministerial experience. However, it is worth telling you this. No UK Chancellor has obviously ever removed the United Kingdom from the EU, and that huge intertwined financial network that we've all lived with for decades and decades, and divorcing the UK economy from the EU's economy is no mean feat. So the task that awaits this new Chancellor one day in the job is absolutely Herculean. One thing also to end on is to tell you that broadly the UK economy is in relatively robust shape. At least that's what the Conservatives will tell you. And that's thanks in part to his predecessor, Philip Hammond, who resigned from the government in protest at Boris Johnson's appointment as Prime Minister. So the incoming Chancellor, Sajid Javid, has a relatively good financial inheritance, and he probably won't want to blow that, will he?
Indeed, we'll see how it all plays out. 98 days to go. Jamie Owens there live in London. Time now for Run. All right then, company news. Let's start with telcos, specifically MTN's Nigerian operation. It's replaced its chair and 5 other non-executive directors who've been on the board for nearly 2 decades. Now, the group says the move is part of an evolution of the board following the listing of the firm on the local securities exchange in May. The firm's relations with Nigeria are improving after it reached a settlement of an $8.1 billion fine with the central bank in late December. A tax case, however, with $2 billion in question, is still yet to be resolved. The South African mobile phone operator Vodacom has reported a 4.2% rise in first quarter revenue. That's as growth from its international business offset an anticipated lean performance in its local markets. Group revenue was up to $1.55 billion for the quarter ending in 30th of June. Service revenue is up 3.9%. Despite the impact of cyclones Idai and Kenneth in Mozambique, international service revenue went up by nearly 20%. The South African restaurant franchise group Spur Corporation says its total franchise restaurant sales grew by 7.2% to over $500 million in the year to end June. Now, the restaurant group, whose chains include Rocco Mama's, Panarotti Pizza, Pasta and Spur Steak Ranches, say local restaurant sales improved in the second half of the year after slowing, as its main middle-income target market remains under quite a bit of financial pressure due to the somber state of the economy. Franchised restaurant sales from international restaurants went up by 16.2%. And finally, the South African retailer Shoprite is moving forward with plans to expand and open shop in 2 key Kenyan urban areas. The retail giant is expected to open a supermarket in the coastal city of Mombasa and another one in the capital, Nairobi. This will be an addition to the already existing Shoprite stores in 2 malls in Nairobi. Shoprite Kenya's general manager Andrew Member says that the supermarket sees a lot of potential operating in Kenya, and it has positive expectations about its future prospects. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. It's time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore why Moody's is saying that the latest Eskom bailout is credit negative for South Africa. And Ethiopia is looking to increase diaspora remittances from the current $5 billion a year.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sina. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Ucheo Paul reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. The ratings agency Moody's says that the South African government's latest proposal to provide additional funding to the tune of about $4.25 billion for Eskom is essentially a negative event for the country's credit rating. The country's finance minister, Tito Mboweni, recently tabled an appropriation bill in Parliament that aims to give the struggling state-owned power utility $4.25 billion. Eskom, of course, has been grappling with a massive debt burden and high operational costs, and that's despite implementing power cuts in 2019 and a raft of power price increases. Moody's is also warning that South Africa could be forced to borrow more given that tax revenues are expected to underperform. The country's fiscal deficit is forecast to widen to 5.7% of GDP this year and 5.6% in 2020. That's up from current projections of 5.2% and 5% respectively. All right, then, so let's dig a little deeper into this conundrum South Africa finds itself in. Angela Coppola joins me now live from Johannesburg with more. So, Angela, the finance minister is asking for $4.25 billion, not a small amount of money. Where will that cash go, and are there any conditions attached to its use?
Well, Raman, the money is going to be used to service that huge debt pile that you were talking about and also to manage running costs. It appears that that's where the bulk of it's going to be going. And it's not going to be going, more interestingly, into any developmental work. We've also heard yesterday that Eskom is about to embark on a shaft sinking expansion program for those tired mines that it has, and that's around $720 million. On the performance conditions that you mentioned, we've been through the speech, and Mboweni only spoke in generalities. We also went through the bill where it does make mention of conditions, but it doesn't go into any specifics. Most analysts were expecting to see more detail either in the bill or in Mboweni's speech, but the skeptics among us are suspecting that the detail or the conditions will most likely appear as goals or objectives in that turnaround strategy we've heard so much about over the last 18 months. And it has been 18 months since we heard about this plan that was in the pipeline and was going to turn the state-owned entity around. We haven't seen it yet, of course. The bailout, of course, is essentially a fait accompli. It will be rubber-stamped by the lower house in the next couple of weeks. So we're looking at no conditions just yet, but it seems like Mboweni is going to be wielding that stick and managing that entity a little bit tighter than his predecessor, Raman.
Indeed. The power cuts that basically savaged economic output in the first quarter of the year, those are over and done with for now. But the fundamental causes that got us to those power cuts, issues of coal supply, for instance, have those been dealt with?
Well, no, we don't exactly know what's going on there at the moment because we haven't been privy to any operational updates in the last 3 months or so, which is unusual. Generally, they do come out quite quickly and they do talk to us and give us some insight into what's happening operationally. We do know that management teams have been operational, have been busy. Many of them were allocated to power stations to make sure that they get their hands dirty and find out what's actually driving those power stations and where the issues are. We, of course, are going through a cold snap at the moment, so it has taxed the grid nationally and specifically in the commercial capital, Johannesburg. The network was under huge pressure today, so load shedding isn't over yet, but because we aren't receiving that information, we're not sure how close we have come to a bout of load shedding just yet. Of course, you'll know that many of those coal-fired power stations are old and near the end of their running life. They're running repairs that are happening. That's the order of the day. And any heightened demand is going to add strain to the stations and to the grid. An analyst I spoke to yesterday suggests that we'll probably start seeing load shedding again come September, and that's the start of the summer season. So we're looking forward to more load shedding, Raman.
Indeed, we'll see how that plays out. But let's look at the price end of things, because in April, power prices are up by almost 14%. There's another 8% increase in prices that's coming in 2020. The year after that, another 5.2%. But given the fact that Eskom has this massive, gigantic debt pile and it doesn't seem to be getting its house in order, shouldn't we be expecting further price hikes beyond what I've just listed?
Absolutely. In fact, those are rolling price hikes that have been introduced a couple of years back. So what happens is every year Eskom sits with NERSA, its regulator, and it goes through what it thinks it's going to need in terms of a price increase to manage its expenses. So there are going to be price increases. It's the quantum that we're waiting to hear from next year. Eskom will probably go and approach NERSA sooner rather than later, because it might need some emergency money on top of the money it's already getting. So it'll ask for relief, which is a tariff hike. On the other hand, though, NERSA is the only defense that consumers have against Eskom hiking that tariff beyond any scope of like reality, as it were. So they've done a fairly good job there, considering what Eskom's been asking. I was at a coal industry event yesterday, and one of the generally accepted views amongst the coal industry players is that the coal industry is partially responsible for the higher electricity prices because of the exorbitant prices that some of the operators were charging Eskom for coal out of contract. So there's the contract coal, which is set for 10, 15 or 20 years, and then there's the emergency coal pile that is supplied, and that's generally provided at a premium, and some people were taking advantage of it. So there was a call made for a fair pricing of coal. Let's see if that actually works out in the next couple of months, Roman.
Indeed. One last question for you. Medupi and Kusile, massive power plants, 9 gigawatts of generation capacity between them, but they're over time and they're over budget. What's the latest with these two twins?
Well, look, in fact, it's estimated that it's going to cost around $1.3 billion each to complete those two stations, and another 600 odd million to fix the design faults and flaws that have become evident over time. And that's just to get the two stations fully operational and functional. The operational updates, again, as I've said earlier, have been few and far between, but we do know that from the last update in April, Medupi is around 94% complete and Kusile around 89%. We do understand that Kusile's last unit will only come on stream around 2021 or 2022, and that's presupposing that there aren't any additional or more hiccups. In the meantime, of course, the old power stations are trying to cope with demand, and Eskom management are holding their fingers and thumbs and toes and whatever they might do in the hope that they're going to match that demand. Of course, the demand is in a muted economic environment. You heard yesterday that the IMF has reduced the economic growth expectations from 1.2% to 0.7%. So that lower demand might be the saving grace for Eskom not to go into load shedding in the next couple of months or so, Raman.
Indeed, we're crossing everything just to see how this plays out. Thank you for the update. That's Angela Kopler there live in Johannesburg. Now, in the meantime, the South African government has set up a comprehensive maritime transport policy as part of efforts to enhance its blue economy, if you will. As part of the implementation of this plan, it's also unveiled plans to set up a South African merchant fleet. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with the details.
As a seafaring nation, South Africa has a proud tradition of participation in international maritime trade. Through the port of Cape Town, it also has one of the world's key trade routes. Through the comprehensive maritime transport policy, the government hopes to leverage this, as well as other skills and industry assets, to develop the country as an international maritime center.
At the moment, South Africa is not a significant ship-owning country. And with the policy, one of the things that we have to do is to develop our own shipping in terms of developing coastal shipping, but equally, because we've got huge commodities in the form of coal and other minerals that are destined for foreign markets. The aim of the policy is to create a very strong shipping portfolio for South Africa so that we would see South African vessels moving these commodities.
The policy is being driven by the Department of Transport while working in concert with other government departments to drive active participation in the maritime economy. The country has struggled with high transport costs since the sale of the national shipping company in the 90s. It is though trying to address that through policy changes.
This country at the moment is losing up to about 40 billion rands because we are selling FOB, which is freight on board. Now the policy of government is to move to CIF, which is cost, insurance and freight, which would mean that South Africa will be offering a total package in that when commodities are bought, we want to provide transport as part of it. Then shipping becomes a critical component.
What that means is that more merchant ships are expected to be registered on the South African Ship Registry. Having the ships locally built could also boost the maritime value chain. The comprehensive maritime transport policy doesn't only call for the creation of a national shipping company to boost South Africa's opportunities in global trade, but also for broader participation in the maritime sector, including in shipbuilding and repairs. The Port of Cape Town also has a key role to play in the policy's overall vision and should work as part of the 8 commercial ports in the country to boost services to the industry.
Our value proposition as a Port of Cape Town is for us to be a one-stop shop, where a ship that calls in the Port of Cape Town must be able to get all the services. You discharge cargo, you load cargo, at the same time you must be able to do your hull cleaning, you must be able to do your ship repair activities, you must be able to do your bunkering.
With seaborne trade accounting for such a significant part of the South African economy, it's a policy that has become a key part of the government's overall growth and development goals. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
On to Ethiopia now. Authorities there say they want to increase the current $5 billion the country gets in annual remittances. The East African nation has one of the largest diaspora populations, at least in the region, and it's planning to use the remittances it gets for a range of things, developing SMEs, creating more jobs and helping to transform the country's agrarian economy. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
According to the 2018 survey, Ethiopia has got $5 billion of remittance from its diaspora. Now, that amount compared to, for instance, Egypt's $26 billion appears to be small. That number, however, was only $300 million in 2003. Ethiopia is aiming for more.
Recognizing the crucial role remittance can play in poverty reduction, in increasing the amount of foreign exchange and promoting development in general, the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs is working with relevant stakeholders to establish a special remittance program, which is at the initial stage now.
Ethiopia's plan, however, is filled with lots of red tapes. The high-level transfers of remittance through informal channels, high cost of formal transfers, and the existence of parallel market exchange rates are some of the challenges which need attention.
To leverage economic gains from remittances and scale up diaspora investment in Ethiopia, it becomes critical to enhance remittances flow through formal channels and support the promotion of innovative financial technologies and funding schemes aimed at encouraging investment of migrants' capital in Ethiopia.
Through well-regulated labor migration, incentives to the diaspora, and modern banking and transfer system, Ethiopia now is expected to make the plan of increasing remittance a reality. The good news is it's a well-placed policy framework.
Ethiopia has taken different initiatives by developing the 2012 diaspora policy, which aims at creating favorable conditions to enhance their participation in development areas, to contribute to the demand for hard currency, and for the transfer of knowledge and technology.
Ethiopia's government, as well as both state-owned and private financial institutions, have been providing attractive investment and property ownership plans to the larger diaspora community of the country. And so far, many have benefited from such opportunities. That is one of the reasons of many to hope for a drastic increment of remittance into the country in the coming few years. Grumtara, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Now, as Kenyan authorities say they want to move towards a goal to have the country entirely powered by renewable energy by 2020, exhibitors are meeting in the Kenyan capital for 2 days to showcase the latest in sustainable innovations in solar energy, oil and gas, and power in general. This is part of efforts to enhance the state of the alternative energy industry in the country.
The innovations here hope to be part of the revolutionary move to renewable energy. Latest technology has been applied to aid traders, commercial businesses, as well as for simple domestic use and small-scale farming. The event also sets the base for East Africa, and particularly Kenya, to be more competitive in the African markets.
You get to see the latest technology and innovations in this country. We have some companies who really want to invest in Kenya, and that's again creating job creation in Kenya.
I'm basically here to see what the clients are exhibiting, and in a bid also to make it simpler for them when they get potential clients in Kenya. I can do the freight for them. I can ship the goods either by air or by sea, and I can support the exporter and the importer on both ends.
This is a state-of-the-art solar pump using a permanent magnet inverter. It requires 330 watts to pump water from wells, boreholes, lakes, or even rivers. The manufacturers say they are now trying to penetrate the Kenyan market.
It is simple, small, and smart. For small models, it can satisfy the family drinking water supplies. For big models, it can irrigate a huge farmland.
Other emerging products such as solar-powered streetlights with installed cameras also made their debut at the event.
This is our all-in-one solar streetlight with camera. This camera can be used with Wi-Fi and also 4G SIM card. And as you can see, this is PIR sensor. So this one can, when people pass by, it is 100% working. When people pass by already, and it is 3% lighting, so it can save energies. As you know, this is all-in-one, so all parks, all the units are in one unit. So customer can only put them on the pole, and everything is done.
SolarGen, a Kenyan brand, was not left out as it caters to different markets, including small-scale farmers.
A system that runs on just one of that panel comes with a performance guarantee of 25 years. So you can think about a small-scale farmer who just has a garden for vegetables or for those usual cash crops. In 25 years, if they are able to save properly, right, and they are able to use very reliable source of energy, you can see in 25 years they can really scale up to something different.
Kenya is hoping to be entirely powered by renewable energy by the year 2020. The nation stands as one of the top producers of geothermal power, with a generating capacity of 700 megawatts. Just this month, Africa's largest wind power plant was opened in the north of the country. Solar energy has not been left out, as the country recently launched a $47 million facility to provide solar solutions to 14 counties through the Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Project. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
It's 18:40 GMT, time for another break. Here's what's coming up next. Trade talks between the United States and China set to resume next week in Shanghai. And the European Central Bank opts to leave interest rates unchanged.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the programme. These are some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Dozens of migrants are feared dead after the rubber boat they were sailing on capsized in the Mediterranean off the coast of Libya. According to a UNHCR spokesperson, over 125 survivors have been rescued so far. The UN agency, however, says up to 150 people may have died in this incident. Libya has become one of the main departure points for migrants seeking to get into continental Europe. Tunisia's 92-year-old President Beji Caid Essebsi, who helped to guide the North African country's transition to democracy after the 2011 revolution, has died. Essebsi's a leading figure in the country's fortunes since the Arab Spring uprising 8 years ago. He was hospitalized last month for a week after suffering from what authorities described as a severe health crisis. A state funeral will be held on Saturday. Over in Somalia, investigations are underway following a terrorist attack inside local government headquarters in the seaside capital of Mogadishu. The mayor of that city is among several people who were seriously injured in the blast, which has created security concerns in a capital often a target for the militant group Al-Shabaab. And finally, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has promised to make the United Kingdom the greatest place on earth, by his words, by leaving the EU on the 31st of October. Britain's new leader has promised to do a new Brexit deal with the bloc in less than 99 days. He's also warned that if EU leaders refused, something he says is a remote possibility, then the UK will leave without a deal. No ifs or buts. That's a run through your headlines. Let's now turn our attention to the ongoing trade tiff between the world's top two economies. Senior US trade officials are set to meet their Chinese counterparts next week in Shanghai. The latest round of talks comes just weeks after the Chinese president met his American counterpart on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Osaka. CGTN's Sun has more.
The talks are on again.
On equal footing and with mutual respect, the 12th round of China-US trade talks will take place in Shanghai on July 30th and 31st.
And Gao says there will be agricultural purchases, but he adds that it's a market decision.
Some Chinese enterprises are looking to import agricultural products from the United States. They have made price inquiries and will sign contracts. The purchases are decided by the enterprises themselves. The new round of trade talks is based on what was agreed on during the two leaders' meeting in Osaka, not directly related to the purchases.
Much more will be on the negotiating table next week. The ongoing trade disputes have rattled both countries. The Chinese Commerce Ministry recorded a 20% drop in non-financial direct investment from China to the U.S. in the first half of 2019.
We hope the U.S. can act according to the principles of indiscrimination, treat Chinese investors in a just and fair way, and be transparent and proper in its national security inspection procedures.
I think we had the expectation coming out of the G20 that negotiations would start again.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin says he expects more meetings than just the upcoming Shanghai talks for a possible deal to be reached. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce had no promises. While the spokesperson didn't really forecast what the next round of talks will bring, Gao emphasized that it's impossible to imagine the world's two biggest economies to decouple, and that for the benefits of people in both countries, they should not. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
On to Europe now. The European Central Bank left its benchmark rate essentially unchanged at, well, 0%. But the ECB changed its policy language this time round to allow for future rate cuts. The central bank underlined the statement, the need for, quote, a highly accommodative stance of monetary policy, end of quote. And that's as weak inflation continues to fall well short of the ECB's target, and economists have actually been calling for more easing. The ECB said its governing council has tasked its economists with looking at options including reserve remuneration and new asset purchases. Essentially, that's code for more QE. On to the auto sector now. A centre has been established in Beijing to defend the rights of car makers and the producers of car parts, both domestically and abroad. CGTN's Kei Shui-hao is here with a look at the facility's unique approach to IP protection, as well as its plans to improve innovation and tech advancement.
Big data and IPR protection. They can be combined to drive capital. At this Intellectual Property Investment Operations Center, all sorts of data are collected, from patent applications to mergers and acquisitions, and even talent.
A patent is like intelligence information. We believe top business teams have the resources to produce the most innovative products. So our data tracks the latest patent applications and scientific achievements of those companies and where their talents go.
With this database, the center finds companies with core intellectual property to invest and provides IPR services for them, an approach that differs from traditional investment institutions. And it only focuses on automotives, a sector Gun says is undergoing profound changes in China with the integration of new technologies like the Internet of Things and the influx of foreign capital.
At a company's early stages, we tell them whether what they aim to develop is something already patented. Later in the research and development period, we help them protect their core technologies. And after products become popular in the market, our services include potential patent licenses and legal lawsuits.
In recent years, China has been establishing a sound intellectual property rights system. This is not just a response to the demand of foreign companies operating in China, but also because domestic companies need to have a solid ground on which to develop technologies, innovate, and go global.
Since 2012, China has processed more domestic patent applications for inventions than any other country, strong evidence of innovation-driven growth in the economy. And yet, Gun says it is a conundrum for many startups as they cannot afford top-notch IPR service. That would in turn damage a startup's development in the long run. This is where government-initiated platforms like Gun's come in.
You need professionals who know patents so as to cater to different companies' needs. But IPR service is not our profit point. Rather, it's equity investment and data services that sustain our business.
This new model is killing two birds with one stone, helping companies with the most potential to protect themselves and thrive, while the center makes profit. Cu Huiao, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, China's eSports industry has generated at least 80 new kinds of jobs, everything from game research and development to the organization of competitions as well. Zhang Shishuan finds out if that's leading to a labor shortage in the industry.
Lu Hongkun, a junior student at Shanghai University, has been keeping a watchful eye on the esports industry for nearly 4 years. He established an esports association in his school with 150 students that have similar ambitions.
I realize there are many jobs related to esports. We have business, operation, and game teams, which is similar to a professional esports club. We cooperate with companies like Amazing Center to learn more about the industry and cultivate talents for the company.
Meanwhile, Shanghai University of Sport is the first to open a major in esports commentators. The major has one class with 21 students. Based on a curriculum for broadcasting hosts, the school has arranged many other courses to give students a better command of the industry's development.
Students majoring as esports commentators will take courses such as esports culture, strategy analysis, and competition operations in their sophomore and junior year to enrich their knowledge of the industry.
But this isn't close to keeping up with the rapidly emerging industry. According to a 2019 Global Esports Industry Development Report by Tencent, there is a shortage of people for 74% of all esports-related jobs. In Shanghai alone, there is still a labor shortage of 150,000 people.
The majority of workers are from other industries, and some of them are former professional game players. It's difficult for us to find IT talents that can organize or operate esports competitions. Our company now has 50 workers, and this is expected to rise to 100 according to our development plan. So we are facing great pressure in terms of recruitment and training. It may take more than a year for new recruits to become familiar with their jobs.
The Shanghai government wants the city to become an international esports capital within 3 to 5 years. According to the 2019 Shanghai Esports Industry Development Report, nearly 49% of the country's esports clubs are based in Shanghai. And the city is in the greatest demand for talents, accounting for 15.5% of total demand nationwide. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. We're going to focus on cocoa this time round. The authorities in the largest single producer of that commodity, Cote d'Ivoire, they've sold about 1.85 million tons of that particular produce. Farmers can expect essentially a farm gate price of between 800 to 850 also francs per kilogram of output. But in general, total output for this entire growing season, the one that starts in October, is going to be about 2 or so million tons. What does that mean for future supply and future prices? We'll find out and update you. Here's what's coming up next. A Nigerian startup is rolling out a unique bicycle service to ease movement in Lagos and deal with that city's notorious traffic.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. A Nigerian company is providing bicycles as a means to ease transportation woes in urban centers like Lagos. Our Bike is looking to promote an environmentally safe riding culture in Africa's most populous country. But will they succeed? Here's CGTN's Alexander Majala with the details of a company that's trying to revolutionize the sector.
Olatunde Nafiu is a student at the Lagos State University. He is hoping to make it to class on time, considering the vast grounds he has to cover to get to the lecture hall. All he needs is his smartphone, the Our Bike app, and he can be on his way.
from the Faculty of Art down to the other gate has always been a challenge for me. So seeing them online on board has been a very great initiative, and I've always used it. At least I don't queue for shuttles again. Maybe I get into this, all I just do is to unlock the bike. I have the app, unlock the bike, then goes right down to my faculty in no time.
Hour means hour in Pidgin English. This refers to something that belongs to more than one person. The Smart Bike Hiring Company was established in 2018 and aims to solve transport challenges. It targets gated communities, estates, and institutions in Lagos.
Hi, my name is Ifeoluwa Ogundipe, and I'm the founder of Our Bike, a mobility company that hopes to revolutionize mobility in Nigeria and Africa. Using Our Bike is so easy. All you have to do is download the app from either your Google Play Store or your Apple iOS store. Once you've downloaded the app and you've signed up and registered, all you have to do is tap Find a Bike. When you find a bike,
Ifeoluwa Ogundipe is one of the brains behind Our Bike. Upon his return from further studies, Ogundipe and his co-founders pooled a sum of $20,000 as seed capital and raised $107,000 in funding from various angel investors.
I moved to France for my studies, and the whole time I was there, I found myself using a bicycle. And it really just hit me like, why can we not, or why do we not use bicycles? You know, it's a really practical way, especially in a city like Lagos, to move around. That was where the seed of that thought was planted.
A 10-minute ride costs 6 US cents. The app offers navigation, and the bikes must be left at specific docking bays or a penalty will be charged to the user. With an estimated 5,500 users, the firm has recorded over 30,000 rides so far.
You know, offer Nigerians a solution that allows them more flexibility, you know, reducing traffic and reducing commuting times, and at the same time also preserve the environment.
Our Bike offers an even healthier alternative form of transport through monitoring over users' biometrics.
Options in terms of mobility are limited to just either buses or shuttles. And truth be told, they're not enough. You know, so it's been really good for us, and it's been really good for the students and also people that live in these communities, because what we've been able to do is to give them another way to move around. We've been able to give them another way to exercise. We've been able to give them another way to stay fit, another way to have fun.
Our hopes to have 5,000 bikes by the end of 2019, with an expansion plan of covering 13 universities across Nigeria. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Right, then I run through currencies as we wrap up the program here for you. Two currencies to keep a very close eye on. Let's start with the Kenyan shilling for you. So 103.90 was essentially the midpoint of the range it was trading in today. 104.11 was the lowest it actually did go to. 103.78 is where it closed in the session today. The South African rand also going back above the 14 rand to the dollar mark. Essentially, it is down by about 1%, and that was mostly because of the comments that Moody's made with regard to the effect of the bailout on Eskom being a net credit negative event for South Africa. Next week, though, is going to be pretty interesting. The SARB has cut rates, and the Fed might cut rates tomorrow. How will that change, cut rates next week? How will that change that number? We'll find out. That's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program. There's several ways of getting your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.